That's okay.
I think we got it, Anita.
I see it. All right, let's start over again. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to our June Sci Cafe. My name is Anita Grove.
What I want to go through very quickly here is who we are, how we came to be, and then obviously what we're doing, the challenges that we expect, and then some opportunities that we see on the horizon. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly and leave a lot of time for questions. I'm going to answer those as best I can, but what I'll commit to you is that if you have questions I cannot answer at the end, I will try to get them to the people who can. So with that, let me start with just a little bit of perspective here. And we are a tiny, tiny little part of the ACF basin. As much as we love the Apalachicola River, when we look at it in perspective, the Atlanta Regional Commission and the Atlanta metro area has roughly 40 times our population. We're not going to flex and force these folks to do anything. So we're in a position now. We've been through the court battles. We've been through all of these fights. We're just not going to win in a brute force battle. I like to say we're not even bringing a knife to a gunfight. We are bringing a spoon. So that's some perspective on population. Also, that Atlanta Regional Commission, that is made up of companies like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Delta Airlines, and the Southern Company, and many other large corporations. So it's not just a matter of the number of people, it is the influence and power of those people. So another little bit of perspective to have is where we stand in the context of the Corps of Engineers. Now, on Tuesday, I was over in Mobile at the Mobile District Corps of Engineers headquarters for their Water Manager for a Day program. And we went through all of the various basin reports. And you see there were the 5 different basins. There's the ACF, the ACT, the Blackwater or Black Warrior River, the Tom Bigby Waterway. We are one part of one basin here. And so that was never more evident to me than sitting through the presentation and hearing the Corps of Engineers personnel talking about the different issues and problems that they're facing. So when we think of ourselves as a very important part of Florida's ecosystem, from their perspective, that's who we are on this slide. We are that tail end of one of their major basins. And I'll talk some more later about some of what that means. And again, it's not just the more people in Atlanta, it's more money dedicated to the resources up there. I compared, this isn't an apples to apples comparison, but it's almost as though Georgia treats the ACF basin and the ACT basin like Florida treats the Everglades. They put a lot of resources into it. It takes up a lot of their, it covers a lot of their geography in Georgia. And so you can see here some of the major money that's being poured into it by Georgia and through Georgia from the federal government. And again, the last item here, the Tri-River is negotiating $101 million on funding of repairs of locks and dams in the system. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well, because that's going to be something that we're all going to have to figure out where we are. So who is the RCSC? Well, in theory, we are 2 members from each of the 6 counties. We were created by resolutions from each county and compact through a compact in 2012. And collectively, we are a member of the larger sub-basin caucus, Apalachicola sub-basin caucus of the ACF stakeholders. Here are some of the other people who work with us in that effort. I'll point out specifically the Appalachia Regional Planning Council. They do our administrative bookkeeping. They help us navigate sort of they make sure we're legal, that our money is accounted for, that we don't spend anything that we shouldn't. We don't blow our $30,000 sometimes budget. But you see here also state agencies, the Water Management District, some non-governmental organizations like Pew Charitable Trust, Riverkeeper, now the Partnership for Resilient Apalachicola Bay. All of us come together because what we understand is that the 6 counties that we represent here don't have the resources that DEP has. We don't have the research abilities that Florida State has. But what we do have is collectively we can convene and bring the quality of organizations like you see here. We can bring these together and convene them toward our mutual goal of improving the river from a economic, environmental, historical, and cultural perspective. So we are a work in progress. The RCSC was very active early on during the period of the lawsuit, the Supreme Court case. There was very little that could be done. We weren't able really to work beyond the basin, and even what we could do within the basin was limited. So what we saw over the past few years necessarily was sort of a diminishment of the RCSC. And now where we are is we are trying to bring it back, reformulate it, repopulate it, reconstitute it, and drive it toward 3 major goals. And being in communications, I tend toward the more simplistic ideas here. So what we kind of narrowed it down to was evaluate. Basically, none of the counties have the resources on their own to understand, keep up with, and track all of the different things that are going on and how they might impact the communities. And so what that leads to is, as many of you have probably experienced, is the rumor mill is active. There's misunderstandings up and down the river about what's going on where, who's doing what, when, what sort of impact it will have. So one of the things that we've taken on with our partners and with our access to Florida State, DEP, and these other organizations is monitoring what's going on and then translating that, evaluating how is this going to affect the Apalachicola River and the people and the businesses and the local governments alongside it. Once we know that, then where our commitment is to communicate what's happening with those. And that's one of my big challenges right now, is to just sort of bring these folks together and then figure out how we are going to be in regular communications with all of the people who need to understand what's going on, so that we don't have these misunderstandings. And then where we have 6 county consensus on positions and policies, where our 6 counties are in agreement, this is good, this is what we want. That's the point at which we can advocate for those with the Corps of Engineers, with Congress, with whomever we need to speak. If we have 6 counties solidly behind us, then we feel like we can move forward with more of an advocacy role. These are the things that we are facing, and they're not new to anyone who's been keeping up with these issues, but a couple of them were new to me. We all know that there's increased pressure on the resources. And that was the subject of the Supreme Court case, and it's something we argued at length. Even so, we believe that there are things that we can do within existing flows. We can do things better if we can communicate how they can be better managed. Another challenge that I talked about and was clarified for me even more on Tuesday is that federal operations really prioritize upstream users. Now, I used to blame the Corps completely for that, but it's less about ill intent than it is about sort of a mismatch in what the Corps' mission and what we need. And I would give you this analogy. It is as though the Corps were a bunch of roofers who have been given pipe wrenches and asked to hem dresses. That's the way that I've come to think about that. There's nothing in their operations, when you look at what they do, how they manage, it is very much on us to come to them to understand their bottom line, what they're being measured against, and communicate our needs in a way that matches their mission. And I hope that, and if I'm raising questions here, don't worry, I'll be happy to answer them as best I can. But one of the things that necessitates is the next bullet, which is we need to know what we need. When one of the problems that we had in the Supreme Court case, and it's one of the problems that we have had all along, is we are just now getting to the point through the work of Steve Lightman and others that we can begin to understand what flows we need when. Before, we gave the impression that, as Ken Jones told us, the perception of Florida was we want, when they ask how much water do you need, we wanted all of it all of the time. And that was the perception that Florida had outside of the basin. Since then, we've gotten some better modeling once we've been able to say, well, and again, the Supreme Court case sort of halted a lot of these conversations. But now that we're able to talk again with Alabama and Georgia and speak fairly freely, what we're getting back from them is a lot more willingness to talk to us now that it's not a question of us versus them, and it's more of a question of we're trying to figure out exactly what it is we need to keep our basin healthy. And there's a lot of this, as Ken pointed out when we gave this presentation to the Regional Planning Council, there's a lot more that can be done with existing flows. Not that we don't want additional flows, but we want to also make sure that we have done everything we can here to make certain that we've asked for things that can be done within existing flows. And that part of it puts us in a much better negotiating position later. Now, here are some of the things that I don't think any of these will be news to you, especially in Apalachicola. The collapse of the oyster fishery was a devastating blow, and we are still not even close to out of the woods there yet, even though we've made a lot of progress. We've still got sand in our floodplain sloughs, and that's still a problem. We've still got to figure out what's going on and how to get that out. We've done a lot of work on the southern part of the river in clearing out some of these sloughs. There's a lot more to do going north. The Tupelo swamps transitioning to hardwoods. We've got some really good research now to sort of explain that process and why it's happening. Up in Albany at the annual Waters Conference in Albany, we heard from some scientists who had done a great deal of research on the Tupelo trees and have helped us understand that the hardwoods they're competing against have more resilience because they have larger seed pods. They can stand being dry, they can stand being wet, much more so than the Tupelo. And so that's information that we can use to take to the Corps to say, hey, this is a problem. the sturgeon. After Hurricane Michael, we've cut off sloughs, we've cut off bedding areas. We've made their migration a little bit harder. We've also discovered that there seems to be a relationship between St. Joe Bay and Apalachicola Bay in terms of water quality. There's some push to regulate the connection between St. Joe Bay and Apalachicola Bay with the intercoastal waterway there. There is pushback saying that that works both ways. The intercoastal also feeds water back the opposite direction from over toward East Bay. So still trying to figure out exactly how that all works. Again, more science. You'll hear a theme here where we are trying to figure out more about what's going on and why, so that when we make our cases to the Corps of Engineers and other policymakers, we're coming in with real information. And then our mussels are making a comeback. How do we keep from screwing up that potential success story? So now the opportunities we're working on, improved communications with upstream stakeholders. Again, we have the ability now that we didn't have before, or during the Supreme Court case while it was going on, we weren't able to have really good communications with the upstream stakeholders. And now with that cloud lifted to a degree, we can start to have these conversations. The picture on the right there is one I actually took on Tuesday. That was in the Water Manager for a Day conference. Among the people there were members of the the Atlanta Regional Commission, City of Eufaula, a lot of other folks. In the front of the right side of the table there is Cameron Baxley from the Apalachicola River Keeper, and then sitting to my left was Susan Anderson, the Executive Director of the River Keeper. One of the things we think will help and that we're working on and that has been discussed before was the Transboundary Water Management Cooperative. This would be non-regulatory, but this would be a place where the 3 states and a lot of the stakeholders can come together and discuss the things that we can do, things that we might be able to go to the Corps of Engineers with jointly. And that makes a lot of difference. And along with that, obviously improving our relationships with the Corps. Again, we are pursuing grants right now to try to develop better research, better modeling, so that we know what to ask for, and more importantly, we know that if we get what we ask for, we are going to see real improvements. Steve Lightman's done a ton of research along with a lot of other folks on modeling the river, and what that does is it helps us to understand and communicate to the Corps of Engineers that when we enter drought periods, there may be better ways to distribute water than they're currently doing. And then, of course, along with that, the drought workshops that we've done jointly with Alabama and Georgia. All right. Oh, sorry about that. Here's where we are going out to the 6 counties and where we really want input from stakeholders. One of the biggest issues that we have, one of the most important things that we can take to the table, and one of the things that we have never had, is a real true picture of the river's economic value. We know what we've got with Tupelo trees, we know the oyster fishery, but we need an economic study that demonstrates that value in a way that we can take to the Corps. That's one of the things that the Corps of Engineers cares about. That is one of the things that we'll respond to is, here's what's at stake economically, in terms of jobs, in terms of quality of life, and then here are ways that we want to improve the economic value. Right now, as I mentioned earlier, the lock and dam repairs, the Corps has $101 million to replace locks and gates and make all sorts of other repairs on 3 of the major dams, including Jim Woodruff. Now, once that's done, and even as it's underway, conversations are going to begin about navigation. Inherent in that conversation are going to be mentions of dredging and mentions of flow. And Ken is adamant, and I agree with him, that we need to be, this is going to be a place where we're going to have some really nuanced conversations, where we are likely to see where it's going to be difficult to get 6 county agreement on what needs to be done. But we really need to separate those 3 issues. So if I get hit by a bus or something happens before the end of this presentation, navigation and dredging and flow are not one and the same. Those are not interchangeable terms. They don't all depend on one another. Opening up the locks and dams means that the Corps can then manage the river for navigation, which it hasn't done since I think 2002 or 2004. They quit managing that. That, of course, stopped the dredging, which many of us considered was a good thing because it no longer put sand out into the channels. But the other part of that is that they no longer had to maintain the flow that would support navigation. And so with the end of dredging came a much lower priority water level, a much lower water level as a priority. As I understand it, at that point, the only thing that is now determining how much water the Corps has to release is the endangered species, the sturgeon, to make sure they have enough water for the mussels and for the sturgeon. Navigation is not really an issue unless it's a one-off. They have to get a big load downriver. When they are managing for navigation, the dredging and the flow were the 2 variables they had to control. The flow was much more, to the extent that anyone remembers everything being better back when there was dredging. What we may be remembering is that there was also sufficient flow. If they were going to let tugboats come up and down that river, they had to keep enough water flowing, so that deprioritized some of their other upstream projects in order to prioritize navigation. Now, part of that you'll recognize as good, no matter how you feel about dredging, increased flow to support that is good. So keep in mind, when these conversations start to come up, it may be one possible outcome of this is we say yes to navigation as long as it means, as long as that's controlled by increased flow. If it means the Corps of Engineers coming back on the river to start dredging again, then that's an entirely different conversation. It may be that we support some level of dredging done by locals at the local level and require all of the sand that's dredged to be taken out of the Apalachicola Basin. That's another potential way to look at it. But again, those are going to be nuanced discussions that don't lend themselves to bumper stickers and probably will have the potential to cause confusion. And one of our missions as the RCSC is to reduce that confusion as much as possible and make sure that all 6 counties and the stakeholders in those counties understand what's involved with no matter what policy we come up with or the Corps comes up with. We're looking at, on the positive end, we're looking at possibly constructing a fish passage at Jim Woodruff Dam that would allow back and forth, would allow the fish to travel back and forth, and we think lead to a healthier ecosystem all around. That's a more massive undertaking than we thought initially. It's been done in other, on the Tom Bigby system, I think they have done it with what they call dummy locks, which is basically they open a lock, let fish in, lift them up, and let them go on the other side. And that seems to work for some species and not others. But for Jim Woodruff, we're actually looking at, if possible, a route around the dam that would be open and closed. And then finally, one of what I would judge as the biggest success story is the slough restoration projects that are going on the southern part of the river. I put in here removing silt and debris, and Ken, I left it in here just to mess with him. Ken said, sand, we're removing sand and debris. We're not removing silt. Silt is good. We want the sand out of there. So I told him I understood completely, but then I just didn't take it out of here. So, but the goal is we want to return these sloughs and all these interconnected waterways out in the swamplands. What's happened now through a combination of sand and through the hurricane and others is that they've started to become blocked off. They're widening out. They become what I understand is called braided channels, which makes a lot of sense. But the effect, if you're trying to drive a boat through a slough back in the swamp, you no longer have well-defined banks, and it's no longer easy to follow exactly where the channels are. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that effort continue, just personally. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions that you have.
Okay, thanks, Jim. That was a great, really concise presentation. It helped me understand it better than I've understood it up until this point. Going through and unmuting everybody. If you have a question, if you want to, oh, I see Jonathan Goodson has a question. Jonathan, you should be self-muted, so you should be able to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Jonathan, if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Yeah, he may have put his question in the question pane. Let me check. How can we get involved? He just had a simple question of how can we help?
Stay on top of what's going on. There are numerous ways. It depends on your interest. Let me go back on the slides here to some of our partner organizations here. Partnership for Resilient Apalachicola Bay is a good organization that Betty Webb is now involved with, and I think if you pay attention to what the partnership is doing, what the Riverkeeper is doing, and just stay up on what's going on and helping us spread the word, that would be one thing that would be incredibly helpful. Letting us know what's going on and what you see from your perspective locally is very important to us. I mean, the RCSC, we work for you. I mean, technically the county commission, but through the county commission to the stakeholders. So the things that you're seeing, anything that you're hearing, if there's misinformation out there, or if there are questions out there, feel free to send them to us. I will get them to people who can help us answer them. My experience so far has been that everything I thought would be a simple answer has required physics. And But when we get in situations like this where there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of non-bumper sticker answers required, the more people who understand it, the better. So that would be my advice. And also I'd give you my thanks for doing that.
Yes, that was one of the reasons I wanted to get you on, was so that people understand what the RCSC is all about. And I shouldn't speak in acronyms. That's the Riparian County Stakeholder Coalition. And I'm guilty myself of not keeping up with the details. We probably need to schedule a regular update so that we know what we're doing. What we suffer from here is never having enough time and enough people. I think that's true with all up and down our system. While we're formulating other questions, I actually had one question that may not be easy to answer. Well, first off, let me ask, are you going to have any local meetings? I know I have worked with Betty to actually host some local meetings on this end of the Apalachicola Basin, which might be a good way to have people connect.
My first mission, we're not right now, we do not have 2 members from each of the 6 counties. We are, I think Gulf County, we still need a couple of members from Gulf County. The way the pact is, the way the agreement was set up is that it would be a county commissioner and 1 other member. I've just now gotten that in Liberty County, my home county of Calhoun County. I don't have another. I was the designee of the county commission, even though I don't live in Calhoun County right now. They thought that maybe 5 generations of being there and growing up there would be enough. But I do need another member from Calhoun. Apalachicola, I believe we have. I believe we have your city manager, Mr. Moran. But my goal first is to fill out and make sure we have a full contingent of members, and then I would like to bring them together. This is why I say we're in the really early parts of this. We're trying to fill out this membership, and then once we can get that membership filled out, bring everyone together, get everyone on the same page, and then we have at least 2 ambassadors in each county. Until that point, I'm happy to come and speak, do presentations like this. Ken is as well. Ken, by the way, just so everyone knows, Ken is our quote unquote paid staff. I think Ken probably puts in 30 hours a month, and I think we pay him for about 15 minutes. So many thanks to him and to the Regional Planning Council. But the other thing I'm looking for is a regular cadence of communications, be it a website, blog, newsletter, app, some combination of those, so that everyone in the basin who's concerned about this will have a central place to go to know what's going on from a neutral perspective, because again, we have to be neutral to the extent we represent all 6 counties. But I want a central place that we can share the news for things like the repairs that are going on with the dams. That's one of the things that even if you've heard about the repairs going on to the dam, that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand that could possibly lead to a push for more navigation. And so those are the things where I think we can take the actual information, we can add value to it as we spread it out in the communities, and that's my goal.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of things that play into that. So,
well, there's no doubt going to be debates, and not everybody's going to see everything the same way. I have had a conversation Saturday night with, in fact, I'll give you a personal example. My uncle was a tugboat captain on the river, and my father was a recreational fisherman who, even though he was a veteran and a patriot, his patriotism ended at the Corps of Engineers. And my uncle was their biggest fan, and Those two couldn't be in the same room together sometimes. But Saturday night, I sat there with one of two living men who has actually pushed barges up the Apalachicola River, along with a bunch of other recreational fishermen. And we had a great civil conversation, and everybody, now I think a lot of beer was involved in that, but it was a civil conversation nonetheless. But I think that's what it's going to take, is understanding that we may not agree, but at least if we're looking at things from a fairly neutral scientific perspective, and everybody gets to make their case and say, well, and then I think we can at least come up with the worst thing we can do. Let me flip this around and say the worst thing we can do, and what has been the case in so many instances, is that an issue that was not caused by people in the community has caused people in the community to oppose one another, and or one community opposing another community. That gets us nowhere. As few people as we have and as few resources we have, we divide ourselves. Ben Franklin said, "A house divided against itself will never stand." But I like his other quote a little bit better. And says, if we don't hang together, we shall surely hang separately. And so I think it's really important that we can have our disagreements and arguments, but I think at the point where we turn and we go to make an ask of the Corps of Engineers or any of our policymakers, I think we need to be on the same sheet of music and in agreement.
Yes, all really good points. And I'm glad you, with your background in communications, are at this place at this time. I think it's important. And like you say, if we walk away, we don't have a voice. Jonathan asked, is there a way to become a member of, I believe that's Jonathan asking that. I live in Franklin County, and can I become a member of the RCSC?
At this point, I think we only have one member from Franklin County, and if that's the case, then I would say yes. I can't pull. I'm having problems pulling up my membership roll right now, but the county commission is responsible. I don't get to choose. I can recommend and ask, but the county commission is who ultimately makes that appointment. If you are interested in it, talk to your county commissioner. Again, I think we only have one member from Franklin right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. And Jonathan, I have your email, and I'll communicate with you and give you some Jim's contact, and then also I believe Ricky Jones would be the person you want to talk to. So they may need somebody to play an active role. Let's see.
I would just ask you, if you do get appointed, be patient. We're still pulling this together and trying to figure out how we're going to. I haven't found an effective way yet to communicate with all of our actual members, and we're still working on that. So bear with us. We're a work in progress.
Yeah. Well, I think you have an excellent outline for putting the group back together. And I know doing anything is keeping it together is the big challenge there. And one other question I had was, we talk a lot about the Apalachicola River, and as I'm learning your role and better understanding the role of the RCSC, you know, we did go through a period of just knowing we were right. We were right because we were treating the resource with respect, and we just knew we were going to win the court case. Well, we didn't. I think we're all still kind of reeling from that decision, but that's not solving the issue. So seeing your work and seeing your description of what the Corps deals with, and I'm fascinated with how we were viewed I understand it and participated in that. So now I understand that it's not enough to just jump up and down and cry, that, you know, we really need to come up with data, and it has put it in an entirely different perspective for me. So thank you for that. But at the same time, I know that there is a way at the core. Essentially what we say is, in some of our outreach, is the Corps manages the river down to the Pinhook, which is 6 miles from the bay. So the bay, Apalachicola Bay, is really not on the radar of the Corps of Engineers to provide water for those species, or the species in the bay. So we're not what we say, we're not a permitted use. Is there a movement to change that, or is it something that's in the water resources bill that would have to be changed at a federal level? Can you shed any light on advancing that?
My understanding is that the Corps of Engineers has more control, has or had more control over that than they let on. Whether they can proactively assume more responsibility for the bay, whether they can do that, I don't know. They don't show a lot of interest in doing that. Again, this is one of the things where we have to kind of understand their bottom line and what they're equipped to do and what they're not equipped to do. They love to build things. They love to manage things that they can control. Is probably the word that if there was a word of the day that I came away with on Tuesday, it's control. They get excited talking about the reservoirs. If you want to talk about commercial, if you want to talk about recreational fishing, they think in terms of Lake Seminole and Lake Walter F. George and places like that, or Lake Eufaula. That's their view of commercial fishing or recreational fishing, not the 10,000 sloughs and backwaters between Jim Woodruff Dam and the bay. So getting them to proactively take on an extra 6 miles of water that would put them even more in the crosshairs. I'm not sure politically how we get that done. but Dr. Dunn up against every Georgia congressman, I don't think he's going to be the ticket.
Yeah. Well, I think
now drawing them into it, if we can come up with some way where our interest and theirs are aligned, that's the way that I think we get to where we want to go. Hey, look, you know, if you really want to do this, then, you know, figure out what it is we need so that we're asking for the right things at the right times. We had that discussion on Tuesday as well. You know, we're if you're around the middle reaches of the river, you're experiencing feast or famine. You go set bush hooks and you come back 2 days later and they're underwater, or they're hanging up out of the sky because the water either fell out or it jumped up overnight. And the response to that was, well, I thought you wanted more water, you know, and then, you know, as soon as we get it, we release it. And it's like, well, yeah, we do want more water. We'd rather it not come in a tidal wave.
yeah.
But where we can say, you know, if there's some way that we can, and there are people, the partnership, and a lot of these folks have done a lot more work on this. So I'm reticent to answer because I worry that people have a lot more detailed and a lot better answer than I would on that. But politically, I'm not sure how we would get them to take on that.
Yeah. But what I'm walking away from with is we need to do a better job of articulating our needs throughout the system, and then advocating for those needs in a manner that let's say collectively advocating so that our voice is stronger and not divided.
That's very well put, Anita. That's a good way to sum that up. If we can go make an ask that fits into their, regardless of what we want it for, if what we ask for fits into what they can do, what makes sense to them to do, and what we can, and even better if we can get 3-state agreement to do, that's where we have a chance to make a real difference.
Yeah. Well, and I think we need to educate up and down the system. I know I had a conversation with Ken last week about trying to produce some graphic images of what dredging accomplishes, and or the effects that or impacts of dredging in terms of the bottom and the species that rely on the river. So just communicating those right now. Like you said, there is a belief that we made the Corps of Engineers mad, and that by stopping dredging, and that if we just start dredging, we'll get more water. But it's not exactly the outcome that we get. So.
Yeah, my exact analogy with my buddies up in Bluntstown on last Saturday night was, when you think about dredging and the flow, the two elements that make up the things that are regulated by the Corps, when they start talking about managing for navigation, people tend to remember that, well, things were better when they were dredging. And it's like drinking a screwdriver and assuming that you feel good because of the vitamin C in the orange juice. One of those two elements has a lot more to do with the health of the system than the other. So flow is generally, I think most of us could get behind the idea of, increasing flow. And again, I haven't gone to each county and talked with the county commissions and presented this. And in fact, as we speak, the locks are being worked on. We've probably got another couple of years before everything is there. But the other thing to remember is too, that it doesn't have to be dredge boats. It can be pleasure boats that can make it all the way up the river. And that could open up some more ecotourism opportunities. It could open up some more opportunities for fish camps and lodging and things that, we feel might, or even light tug traffic, shallow draft. So there's a lot of things to consider. I don't pretend to have all the answers, and I don't. I think it'll be important as we get closer to this and these conversations start coming up. My big fear is that my biggest hope is that we avoid the knee-jerk response, and that everybody can sit down and say, okay, what does this really mean, and what would this really look like, and what would the impact be on the system? And then I think that gives us our best chance of making a coherent case.
Yeah. Well, we thank you so much for enlightening us, and I look forward to the group increasing their presence and hearing more about future successes, and we all are willing to help in any way we can. And I think spreading the correct information is where we can all begin.
I think that's where we have to begin, and I really, really appreciate the opportunity to put it out there. I wish Ken was here to come back and correct anything I said wrong, but he's not. So if he asked you guys, I did a great job, okay?
Yeah, okay, well, we recorded it, so I should have asked your permission beforehand, but we had such a fumble at the beginning. I don't know why we couldn't get your screen up, but we appreciate everybody's patience, and I hope you'll join us next month in July on the 25th. And I've shut down my screen, so I can't tell you who it is because I've forgotten in that little bit of time. But join us on the 25th, and we will be talking about the impact of the water and the Tupelo trees in the basin. and how the changes in water flow have affected the Tupelo trees. So we look forward to next month. And thank you, Jim. We really appreciate it, especially stepping in at the last minute.
Y'all have a great day. The Tupelo presentation will be outstanding. I encourage all of you to participate in that. There will be some things. I watched that thinking, how exciting could this be? And I walked away going, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yes, well, we look forward to that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.